This is Michael Jordan, and I'm reading Afterwards, my story which will appear in the upcoming WordCrafter anthology, Midnight Roost. And you had the light, huh? Brad stared, wondering what the officer was saying and struggling to focus his eyes. Light? Not the light at the end of the tunnel. Was he near death? He felt fine. The light, sir, repeated the officer. You had the green? Oh, the traffic light. Yeah, sure, of course. Of course he'd had the light. He'd have stopped if the light had been red, wouldn't he? Obviously he would have. He twisted his neck, trying to see past the EMT lifting him into the ambulance. He failed. Put me down, you guys. I don't need an ambulance. I'm fine. Take it easy, sir, said the officer. You've had a nasty knock on the head, and a doctor should check you for a concussion. Brad shook his head. His ears rang. Was I in an accident? But the stretcher slid into the ambulance before he got an answer. Guess I must have been. The doors clanged shut, and somehow the clang of those doors was totally terrifying. He screamed and screamed and sat up. The scream died in his throat as he looked around. His room. A sliver of moonlight slanted through the glass block just under the ceiling, striking a battered sofa draped in most of his wardrobe. The huge TV was shadowed, but a stray reflection glinted on the screen. His keyboard was just a dim blob. There were rapid footsteps on the stairs up to the house. The door burst open, and his mother appeared, clutching her bathrobe. He opened his mouth to remind her that she was not allowed in his room when it occurred to him that since he'd been screaming, it might be just as well she'd come running. Sweetie, what's the matter? Are you all right? She flipped the light switch and darted to his side. Sitting down on the edge of the bed, she extended a hand to feel his forehead. Reflexively, he ducked away. I'm fine. He peered around the room, still astonished to find himself at home. I guess I had a dream. Those slamming doors were just a dream? About the accident? There really had been an accident? Oh, he was relieved to hear it. Such a terrible thing. Terrible? But obviously he'd made it home safely. No wonder you're having nightmares. That poor girl. But try to remember, it was an accident. You can't blame yourself. What girl? He almost said the words aloud. Instead, he just looked at his mother, hoping she would hear his wordless confusion. Perhaps she did. You look awful, darling. Why not come upstairs and let me make you some hot, warm milk to help you sleep? Normally, he would have sneered at warm milk, but at this exact minute, the kindness of the offer was tempting. I do need to unclench, she admitted. Could I have some cocoa instead, please? Her whole face lit up, as if his being polite to her was something strange and wonderful. The newspaper was lying on the kitchen table. Local news, he read. Crash victim still... But a coffee cup was sitting on top, so he couldn't see the last word. While he was sipping his cocoa, his mother cleared the paper away. Oh, that girl. He should have known. Except he was just so rattled by the dream, so uncertain of how much of the event culminating in the clanging doors was real. The girl in the other car. You've got to stop having all these bad dreams, said Greg, who was sometimes a real jerk, like Brad was having nightmares on purpose. You're just nervous about going to the police station, said Brad's buddy Zach. But it's nothing really. You sit around and wait. A cop asks you some questions. You speak your piece, and they print off a copy for you to sign. Or maybe you just sign one of those electronic things. They thank you for your time and cooperation, and we head out for lunch. Another morning successfully wasted. Zach was an expert because his brother testified in a trial once. Or maybe he's just feeling guilty, said Brad couldn't remember her name. Not one of his regular peeps. Somebody's kid sister? And why should he feel guilty? Demanded Karen. She was Zach's girlfriend, and she had a little mother of all the world complex. He didn't do anything. Well, he did ram her car and put her in the hospital, pointed out Greg. Honestly, why did they let this guy hang out with them, wondered Brad. But it wasn't his fault, burst out Karen. It was just an accident. She ran the red light and he couldn't stop in time. That sounded right. I'm not saying it was his fault, said Greg. He had better not be. But it still happened. People feel guilty about stuff that's not their fault all the time. Like they should have found some way to stop it. You know, the whole no man is an island thing. Well, that's true, conceded Karen. Is that true, Brad? Said the girl. She was young, nice looking, with cocoa and cinnamon skin and blue streaks in her hair. What was her name? Do you feel bad about hitting that girl? He stared at her, mouth open, stunned, paralyzed even by the question. Well, of course he does, snapped Karen. What a question. Oh, please, interjected Zach. Can we stop going on about guilt? This isn't a sensitivity session. But even Zach couldn't stop Karen when she was on a roll. What do you think, girlie? He's happy he hit her? He doesn't care what happened to her? Most people backed off under a Karen assault, but the blue-haired girl just looked back, smiling. So Karen turned to Brad and laid a sympathetic hand on his shoulder. How is she doing? I don't know, he said, avoiding all eyes. I've been afraid to ask. Afraid to ask? Something like that. I heard she's really in bad shape, said the blue-haired girl. Probably going to die. Terrible thing to have happened to you. She shook her head sadly. What was her name again, Brad? What was her name? What was her name? The words echoed in his head and around the room so loudly he had to scream. He screamed and screamed. What was her name? And then he was sitting upright in his bed, clutching his mother's shoulders, crying, What was her name? What was her name? His mother bit her lip and pulled him all the way into her arms. Her name was Zoe, dear. Zoe Holiday. She pushed him gently back. Sweetie, we've got to get you past this. I'm calling the doctor in the morning. You mean a shrink? Brad was very sure that a shrink couldn't help. No, Mom, don't do that. Just don't. You can't make me go. Usually she caved when he insisted, but this time she held her ground. Don't give me that. I'm making you an appointment, and that's final. We can't go on like this. I need some sleep, even if you don't. She hugged him again. I know it looks pointless to you because you're scared and depressed. You don't see any way out, so you don't believe there might be one. But trust me, a doctor can help. It's what they do. He turned his head every which way as if looking for a way out. Could we just give it another week, Mom, to see if she gets better? But when he looked back, she had pressed her fist up against her mouth. Mom? Sweetie, she isn't going to get any better. Tell me you know that. Oh, yeah. Let's talk about your memory issues. You say you forget things. What sort of things? Brad pushed himself out of the chair and crossed Dr. Rosenberg's office to examine a painting. The office was all soft furniture, soft colors, soft light, radiating comfort and welcome. But the artwork was too soft, utterly without edge or meaning. It's no particular thing, just everything after the moment I wake up, but it only lasts a few minutes, until I catch up. Catch up? Dr. Rosenberg's voice was also soft and comforting. To real time. The dreams, they're like reruns, a replay of something you missed the first time. So it feels new, but you're actually a couple of episodes behind. I see, said Dr. Rosenberg. Brad didn't quite roll his eyes. Yeah, sure you do. So let's talk about what you do remember. These dreams are all about the accident? Sort of. Dr. Rosenberg raised an eyebrow. Well, I never actually dream about the accident. I just sort of dream around it. The doctor watched him and waited. I dream about driving away from the gym, about the cop in the ambulance, about making my statement at the police station. I dream about the phone ringing and knowing it's bad news, but not the accident itself. And you wake up just before you get to something you would rather forget? What? He'd never thought of it that way. It was an uncomfortable idea. He looked up at her nervously. He'd never noticed before how green her eyes were, unnaturally green, like a traffic light. Maybe she wore contacts. You remember leaving the gym, she murmured, but not arriving at the intersection, just leaving it in an ambulance. You skip over remembering the accident. You remember waiting on a bench at the police station, and you remember Zach taking you to lunch afterwards, but you bypass making the statement. Apparently, you don't even want to remember talking about the accident. Oh God, he whispered. You're right. She nodded. The light, reflecting strangely off some colored glass somewhere, dappled across her hair in a blue streak. But eventually you'll have to face that memory, Brad. That's why you're here. Why? He burst out. If it's so awful, why not let it stay buried? What's the use of dragging it out? He thought she'd say it was the only way to stop the dreams, but she didn't. A repressed memory is like an infected wound. If it stays buried, the contagion will spread and contaminate everything in your life. Over time, it can fester into incapacitating mental illness. Or worse. What? Had she said that? Worse than incapacitating mental illness? What did you say? I said it can fester. No. Did you say or worse? Oh, no, of course not. She smiled. What could be worse than incapacitating mental illness? What could be worse? What could be worse? What could be worse? As usual, he woke up screaming. He sat gasping, clutching the damp sheet around him, waiting for his mother to appear at the door. But she didn't come, and he found he missed the coddling. Apparently she'd slept through his screams for once. She'd taken something, he remembered. He was supposed to be taking something, too. The doctor had given him some pills to suppress the dreams. Just for now, she'd said, to buy us a little time while we see how the therapy goes. They're not for long-term use. Dreams are a necessary function. You can't dispense with them indefinitely. Plus, you'll get habituated to the medication and it will stop working. But the pills had left him so depressed and stupid when he was awake that he'd stopped taking them. I guess that was a mistake. He got out of bed, thinking he would wash his face, or, better still, go upstairs for a hot shower. Maybe make himself some cocoa while he was up there. He could even sleep on the sofa, since his bed was soggy with sweat, and leave changing the sheets for in the morning. But he'd stop and pee down here first. The basement sink wasn't much of a sink, with only a small, cracked mirror. Only habit made him stop to wash his hands. Only good posture made him look in the mirror. But he looked, and jumped back with a scream. It was not his face. It was a girl, a pretty one. Girl with tawny skin and blue streaks in her hair. He didn't recognize her, but she looked vaguely familiar. Whoever she was, what was she doing in his mirror? There was nobody behind him. There wasn't room in the bathroom for two people. But there she was. He realized suddenly, and he almost screamed when it came to him, where he'd seen her before, in one of his dreams. She'd asked if he was sorry about the crash. She'd asked if he remembered the girl's name. Oh, please, said the girl in the glass. You think you remember me from your dream? That's it? There's no place from the real world where you might have seen me before? Like right in front of you in the newspaper, Einstein? I got a whole Sunday supplement, but you can't imagine who I could be? You're Zoe, He whispered, "This can't be happening. I must be dreaming again." "Oh, yeah? You sure about that?" She smiled a wicked smile. "You've been pretty unstable lately. Your own mother sent you to a shrink. Maybe you've upgraded from nightmares to hallucinations." She smiled again. He wished she hadn't. "Or maybe I'm just messing with you." "What are you doing here?" She rolled her eyes. "Stupid question. You killed me. I'm haunting you." "But it was an accident," he wailed. "Was it?" She rolled her eyes again. "Is that really how you remember it, Brad?" And then she was gone, leaving just his own stubbly, haggard, bleary-eyed face in the mirror. "What?" he screamed, pounding his fist on the mirror, which cracked further. "What am I supposed to remember? And how am I supposed to remember it when I can't remember it?" He slid down the wall to the floor, where he either fell asleep or stopped dreaming. Either way, he lay huddled under the sink with the bath mat pulled over his shoulders until his mother came to wake him. "You're lucky you didn't end up in the emergency ward," said Dr. Rosenberg. "Your mother was very frightened. If she'd hoped for a reaction, she was disappointed. So let's talk about this latest dream." "Double dream." "Ah, yes, a dream within a dream. Was that why this one was so particularly terrifying? Finding you were mistaken about what was real?" "Sort of." He leaned forward to look at her. "You do have green eyes, but not super green." "And that's significant because—" "In the dream, your eyes were traffic light green. So I guess this time you're real." "Good to know." She smiled. "And you dreamed of me. Let's hope that indicates I'm getting through to you. What did I say in the dream?" Brad fell back into the soft and enveloping chair. He could fall asleep if she stopped talking, and he stiffened at the thought. "Oh, the usual. What do I dream about? And careful with the pills." "Oh, do I always say that?" She chuckled. "And then, when you dreamed you were awake, what happened?" "Zoe came to hunt me. She said I was going to have to remember sooner or later." "Zoe Halliday?" The doctor sat up a little straighter. "That's a new development. Is that what made this dream so painful? Miss Halliday's ghosts? Or the threat that you would have to remember?" "Hey, you're out of line." "Am I, Brad? I've been telling you all along you've got to remember, but you keep ducking it. Now your own dreams are saying you have to remember." "Remember what? That there was an accident? That I was driving down Altwoods Lane and I ran into Zoe Halliday's car at the bottom of the hill? I've never denied that. What else is there for me to remember? Alien abduction?" "I don't know the answer to that," said Doctor. "You're going to have to tell me. It's time to stop talking about dreams and focus on what you haven't told us about the accident that troubles you so much." He opened his mouth to protest, but she overrode him. "You do know, Brad. Somewhere in the back of your mind you know. You couldn't have buried it this thoroughly if you didn't know." There was a long silence while Brad tried to stare her down, and she met and held his gaze without flinching. Finally he looked away, muttering, "Your eyes have gone traffic light green again." He looked furtively around the room. He saw no sign he was descending into dreamland again. It was probably just a trick of the light. But still, he kept his head down and didn't look at her. "What an odd image that is," she murmured. "Not emerald green or neon green. Traffic light green. What's the significance of that?" Startled, he looked up, and her eyes were a normal green again. She smiled. "Oh, come on, Brad. Free association. Whatever comes into your mind, right off the top of your head." "Traffic light green. iPhone," he answered, before he had time to think. Having said it, he played it back in his mind. iPhone? What did that have to do with the traffic light? As soon as the thought struck him, her eyes went shining green again, and then... Oh, God, and then... her eyes, or the traffic light, whichever, turned red. "Bingo!" cried a voice in his mind. A girl's voice, a girl with blue hair. "Bingo! Bingo! Bingo!" He screamed and screamed. But this time he didn't wake up. Please tell me I'm dreaming, he begged. Pinch me or throw water in my face. Make me wake up. He rocked back and forth in his hospital bed, but they had him in restraints. Oh, sweetie, you're not dreaming, wept his mother. Can't you see that? Believe it, Brad, smirked Zoe. You don't get to wake up from this one. What you see is what you get. Dr. Rosenberg ignored Zoe entirely, cutting in front of her to lean in and murmur, You're not dreaming, Brad. You keep telling yourself that because you're still avoiding the truth about the accident. But no truth is as painful as the damage you do to yourself trying to avoid it. All you need to do is face yourself. Well, no, that won't work, said Zoe. Dr. Rosenberg went right on talking, but she seemed to fade out when Brad transferred his attention to Zoe. You had your choice to cop to the truth, but you blew it. Just couldn't own your own screw-ups. Well, it was a limited time offer. You're going to have to do some real penance now. But it's not fair, he burst out. I told you it was an accident. Yeah, spat Zoe, some accident. You were still halfway up the hill when the traffic light went red, but you were too busy texting Zach to notice. And who knows, by then maybe it really was too late to stop, but you didn't even try. And now I'm dead. For a minute she stopped being a pretty girl and transformed into a bleeding, battered corpse. It was much more horrifying than it looked in the movies, and the smell made him retch, even while he was trying to scream. I'm dead, and you want to walk away? You call that fair? You pretend you forgot, but you knew you'd run that red light. Did not, he wailed, but she rolled right over him. Oh, yeah? I noticed you didn't tell the police you forgot. You told them you had the green. Repressed memory, my ass. You knew it had really happened when you made your statement, but you said it was my fault so you wouldn't get in trouble. And after that, you just didn't bother to remember because it wasn't important to you. So spare me the sniveling about fair. Of course it was an accident, sobbed Brad's mother. We know that, darling. We've never doubted it for a minute. Of course it was an accident, said Dr. Rosenberg. Why are you having so much trouble accepting that? Ooh, I know the answer to that one, chimed in Zoe. When they say it was an accident, they simply mean it wasn't deliberate. But when you say it was an accident, you mean you don't have to take any blame for it. I said I was sorry. Oh, but you didn't mean it. Zoe smiled her horrible, hellish smile. Not in the slightest. But don't worry. There's plenty of time for me to make you sorry. The end.